Hello and welcome to Loch Ness Living. In today's episode we're going to be having a chat with Donald to tell us a little bit more about Gaelic tours and I think the connection between knitting and the Gaelic heritage of the Loch Ness area. So welcome, thank you very much for giving us your time today. Tell us a little bit more about the Gaelic tours and what you have on offer.
Well, the Gaelic Guides is something that I'd been thinking about for a couple of years. And it seems to me it's a missing element to a lot of what is offered in terms of the tourism services. Mm-hmm. So many people, because Gaelic's a minority language these days, so many people just do not have that background, don't have the knowledge, the awareness of what the language means. So I thought there must be a demand there for people who want to come across standard English language tour, mm-hmm. but with the added spice, a bit of Gaelic added in, and simple stuff, place names, trees, heritage, culture, mm-hmm. even people's names, how patronymics work and that kind of thing. Uh-huh. So lots and lots of stuff to draw on. So
they don't need a Gaelic background, or they don't need to be a fluent speaker?
Absolutely not. I think that'd be a very small market I was aiming at if it was looking for Gaelic speakers. I could of course do it in Gaelic if people wanted, uh-huh. but no, it's aimed at people who are coming to the area, and Gaelic is a big part of what makes the Highlands unique.
Okay, and how would we notice that? I mean, I live in Drumnadrochit, for example. How does Gaelic work its way into the culture of my area?
Well, Drumnadrochit itself means the ridge of the bridge. Drain is a ridge or a spine. Drain, na, drochage, and drochage is bridge. Place names is one of the critical places. If you look at a map of the Highlands, any number of place names, most of them will be drawn from Gaelic in some shape or form. So there's a depth of knowledge and understanding there you can go away with if you know what you're looking at in those place names. In terms of the Gaelic heritage, if you go back, you don't even have to go back that far in this area, decades, if that, and you would have found people living in the Glen who were native Gaelic speakers, old folk who'd been speaking Gaelic all their lives, and that would have coloured their way of life, their experiences and so on. Mm-hmm. So it's not something in any way that's ancient history. Okay. And even these days you have kids being taught Gaelic in the school of Drumnadrochit. So there's a resurgence in interest in Gaelic. So there's a lot there to draw, and it's definitely an added element to people's holidays, to people's experience and visit of the area, mm-hmm. to just get that bit of Gaelic thrown in.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking it might be familiar to people if they've had a parent or a grandparent, if there's been some kind of connection to the past, but then somebody's migrated and moved elsewhere. They may still have one or two words or kind of, what's the nice terms that people use for each other, the nice kind of sentimental terms that people use for each other. Those kind of things are often rooted in native languages.
They can be, and there's a huge, as many people will know, a huge immigration from the Highlands across the globe, mm-hmm. particularly to Australia, North America, South America. People were both through choice, economic migration, or forced. People were sort of pushed off the land. So lots and lots of people who live overseas will have that family connection back. They may have family names and those kind of things to come back to. But I think it's just the element, I keep on saying, I'm repeating myself, the element of something which, unless you come along and have your eyes opened to Gaelic, mm-hmm. it would pass you by and you wouldn't know what you were looking at, you wouldn't know what you were hearing or reading.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to me because I'm obviously not from this area, but I've come from Wales and we have the Welsh language, and every now and again a little bit of something slips in. It slips in my slang and in my casual language, and I think, oh gosh, and nobody knows what I'm talking about.
Well, there'll be lots of things like that in common or garden language usage in the Highlands, which will have a derivation of Gaelic. Now that you've placed me in the spot, I can't think of what those things would be, but there'll be lots of things like that where the original word, the root of the word, is still being used commonly. Things like the ben. We were up the ben today. Mm-hmm. Well, ben is bine. Up the glen again, glen, glown, is Gaelic. So lots of stuff like that, which people will use on a daily basis. They wouldn't necessarily think it's Gaelic, but it is.
Yeah, that's lovely to see the connections. One that popped into my head from Welsh is panad for a cup of tea. Instead of having a cuppa, you'd have a panad, and that comes from the tea urn that was used when people were making, when it was very expensive to make tea, and so you'd make it in a big tea urn, and that had the special name of the panad, so you'd have a cup.
I think it's interesting that Welsh and Gaelic, the Celtic language is split in two, and it's quite.
But is there something shared in there somewhere?
Yes, and P Celts and Q Celts. So the Welsh word for head is pen, so it's a P sound. The Gaelic word for head is ceall, so it's a Q, it's the P's and Q's. And I think that's maybe the origin of the phrase, mind your P's and Q's. Maybe not. Maybe I'm making that up. But certainly it works in that Gaelic, in that Celtic language context, the P Celts and the Q Celts. So there are links there, but they're quite hard in the two groups of the languages. Yeah. On the other hand, the Gaelic they speak in the Isle of Man and in Ireland, it's much more similar to Scottish Gaelic. So Welsh, Breton, Cornish, they are Q Celtic languages. They're P Celtic languages, and the others are the Q Celts. So the language split.
That's really interesting, because a lot of people assume that because I have a little bit of familiarity with Welsh that I'd take to Gaelic really easily, and it's actually incredibly difficult for me. And I was trying to explain it, and the simplest way to say it is the mouth sounds are different. I literally cannot get my mouth around some of the words, because the way that I would pronounce them would be completely different, and it looks and it feels wrong to me. And when people were trying to do, I can't remember the correct word for it, but when you take a name and you're referring to somebody else and you drop the H into the name in Gaelic, you can't do that in Welsh. The rules are different. But my name, Dwynwen, is a Welsh name, and somebody tried to do it to that. And I was like, you can't apply your rule to my language, because this is a word that has a specific meaning. We got all tied and wrapped around each other. But it's interesting because the foundation is maybe there back in kind of history, but then they went on separate paths.
Separate paths. And there are some words which don't belong to either language. So that, as I understand it, I was thinking of something more like the Welsh, as I understand it, for church is iglos, and in Gaelic it's English, and French it's église. Yes. And that obviously comes from a Latin root. Yeah. So languages do take on other words from different sources. Yeah. Gaelic took on lots of words to do with the sea and seafaring from the Norse. Yeah. Lots of words to do with the church and religion from Latin. Yeah. Less so than English did. English is a great language for accumulating all sorts of words and imagining they're then English. But Gaelic and every language does that. It sort of brings stuff in. And
we don't in Welsh we don't have the Latin letters as part of the alphabet. You don't have X's and Z's. Which makes it fun when you're trying to spell taxi.
We managed to get by with 18 letters rather than 26.
Oh, well, I think in Welsh we've got 22, so...
We're much more efficient.
Wow, that's fantastic. And it's interesting then when it does come to the pronunciation of modern words and how much... I know that there's a lot of discussion in traditional kind of the French language and preserving that as to whether you do take a word like taxi and spell it or kind of modify it, or whether you do the description of a vehicle for hire of some sort in the language. Like, where do you go with the
I think words? Both. So taxi is taxi, T-A-C-S-I, taxi. But on the other hand, a mobile phone, well, what is a mobile phone? It was a hand phone live. But some of these things just happen organically, rather than there being a committee that takes a judgment as well. That's what we will use for this. It can be quite organic, and all the sounds are there. So although I say we manage with 18 letters, all the sounds are there. They're just formed with different combinations of letters.
Yeah, and I'm trying to fit. So in Welsh, we put some letters together in order to fill the gaps in the kind of the alphabet in the sign language. We put some letters together to make sounds. And,
exactly.
So exactly. A similar thing.
Again, trying to think of examples off the top of my head. A J sound. Yeah. So ID gives you that in some instances. So drochage, drochage. AID, the end of that is a J sound. And that's the ID coming in. So you get the same sounds, but formed differently. And then I think there is a tendency, as you said, for people to look at, if you're really familiar with one language, you look at a second language, and you're automatically trying to use the tools that you have to come up with something that makes sense. And sometimes it works, but if it's a completely separate language as Gaelic is, then it doesn't work. There was something else you said there about, I thought you were going to talk about how pronunciation kind of come down and can echo in the current day. There's a really good example of that. Not so far from here, there's 2 places in Scotland, at least 2, maybe more, and they're spelt in English identically.
Okay.
B-A-L-L-O-C-H.
Okay.
B-A-L-L-O-C-H.
Okay.
Down near Glasgow, down near Loch Lomond, that's pronounced Balach.
Yeah.
Up here, just outside Inverness, it's pronounced Baloch. They're spelt identically the same.
All right.
And the reason that has come down and still persists is that Balach comes from the Gaelic word for a pass, which is a bialoch. And Baloch comes from Ballinloch, the town by the loch. So the anglicisation has come up with the same spelling. But I find it really fascinating that local people are still using completely different pronunciations for the same word without knowing why. When you start probing below the surface, well, that's why you're doing that, because it has a root in Gaelic.
Yeah. I like it when you see little words that have slipped into mainstream English, and like I know that's not not got the origins in English. That's come from somewhere else. That's really interesting. If you track it down, it's really fascinating.
Yeah. So, like I say, it's just there's so much of it here. There's just it's only really in relatively recent times that it's stopped being a sort of commonly spoken language, and there's just so much there that it's. I think it's just an extra added element that people can enjoy.
It is, and it's one place in which, in a time when we live in a global society, and people talk about a global language, maybe languages being in decline, that a language such as Gaelic, that's a minority language, can find a place in the modern world and find something of value through that kind of cultural connection and heritage, because people do feel that and value that very strongly, and it's one of the main reasons why people come to the Loch Ness area, is to explore their cultural heritage. So by bringing the past into the present, there is something very valuable there.
And I think also people, just this morning on national mainstream radio, I heard something talk about, there was a conversation talking about Gaelic, and the interviewer posed the question, wouldn't children be better off learning a modern language? And my thought is, well, define modern, because I was brought up speaking Gaelic. Gaelic is my first language. I spoke Gaelic I still speak Gaelic to my mum, my brother, my sister. It would be unnatural, completely unnatural for me to do that, to speak English to them. So it's a modern language in the sense that it's still being used as a community language. It's a minority language, certainly. Yeah. But it's a question of defining modern. And I think we do a disservice if we tend to think, it's something to do with ancient history, because it definitely isn't. It's something that some people use on an absolutely daily basis. I
wonder if that is quite a British way of thinking as well, that we have a very singular and black and white approach to languages. It's something that I've never had to kind of justify as a point of view with visitors from Europe or even from the States or Canada. There is kind of acceptance for plurality of languages, that someone can have 1, 2, 3, Absolutely. 5, because people live in households that are much more diverse. There's been much more migration into an area. There's been a lot more coming and going. Whereas in the UK, we seem to be very fixated on just having a single kind of defined point of view.
I think there is a very monolingual perspective across the UK. But if you look at cities, even cities like, if you go to a primary school in Inverness these days, and the welcome signs on the doors, you'll have Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Czech, Asian, Pakistani, Gaelic, English, a whole diversity of different languages. So definitely that's changing. But I think there's probably an accepted premise that it's a monolingual country, and it clearly is not.
It is,
and never has been. Never has been.
And I am biased in this area because my daughter did go through Gaelic medium education. She doesn't have it now in secondary school, but she certainly went through it all in primary school. And not only has she been able to pick up languages quickly, other languages, because the switch in her brain was flipped from a very early age. But I find she has an appreciation and just a general kind of understanding that other people live lives differently. Not everybody speaks English. There's a variety of options out there in the world. And I think that was certainly, if it didn't come from Gaelic medium education, I think it was fueled and enhanced by Gaelic medium education.
I think once you have two languages, and especially if you have two languages from an early age, it's much, much easier to pick up a third or a fourth or a fifth. And I know from my own experience, I didn't get Gaelic education in school, but I went to school fluent in two languages. Learning French was really relatively easy. Not the grammatical stuff. I was never that good on je suis tout seul. But when it came to listening and speaking, because I had a wider range of vocalization I could use, I was comfortable with noises. I was comfortable with that kind of stuff, so I found French came along easier. So much so I could go to France and convince people, as long as I don't probe too deeply, that I have a vague grasp of the language, which I actually don't, just tiny bits. But it's because you sound different from somebody who's a monolingual English speaker trying to get to grips with a second language. So I think there's definitely that. And there's also loads of really, really good research these days about the cognitive benefits, the developmental benefits of kids being bilingual. Not necessarily Gaelic, it can be any two languages, but bilingual from an early age gives them all sorts of other benefits in terms of empathy, in terms of multitasking, in terms of like a sort of radar that's permanently turning as to how they approach the world.
It's fascinating. Gosh, we could talk about, we've just gone so far away from wool and yarn. We could go down this track forever, couldn't we? One of the things that's really interesting about I would say a rural language like Welsh, like Gaelic, is that a lot of the words and phrases come from the crofting, the farming background of the farming community. I thought it was really interesting when we were chatting before we put the camera on. You were saying that there are different words for wool, as in the yarn, and the wool that comes off the weaving. So,
well, the word I know at least for knitting, I have to say, isn't my strong point. I probably did once upon a time. My granny probably showed me knitting, and I may have had different words. So the word for wool is claw, with a nice long O sound there, and a thick L. Lots of people struggle with a Gaelic thick L, claw. So claw is wool. Lots of people will be familiar with Harris tweed, and that's claw more, the big cloth, the big woolen cloth, as distinct from a knitted, like a ganzi, a jumper. So there's there will be lots and lots of words, and there are lots and lots of there's a strong culture of dyeing the yarn, and that dyeing being done with lots of local things, particularly lichens and things taken off rocks. And I guess that must be fairly universal. People would have used whatever they had to hand.
They used what they had available to them, and then it becomes the colour of the region, which trickles down through history. And I think that's the connection that people make with tartan and kind of area, is that the colour of the area became the colour of the weaver, because they would work closely with their producer, and then it just becomes this.
And I think there's actually, I mean, obviously tweed weaving, although it's still a cottage industry, it's become relatively sophisticated, and the use of modern dyes is there. But I think there was quite a diversity, with a range of good dyes they could use. So claw, so things like colours. So you're looking at there. I've picked up a good example, haven't I? Where the Gaelic for purple is probably purpi, which is like a derivation from purple. Be a bit of so we've got, and this is a good one because that's Jarrag is red, and you often see that in place names, hills by Jarrag. But Jarrag, or a roach being russet. So
is that more the orangey?
More that orangey kind of colour. So Jarrag, roach, I think, with my glasses on, I think that's a kind of black even. So black is very common. That's du. And you'll see du in lots of places. But actually, also interestingly, different areas will use different words. In the same in any language. If you have a language that's spread across a big geographical area, particularly back in the old days before you had media to end up with this kind of commonality, you would end up with different words meaning different things. So where I come from, or where my Gaelic comes from in Lewis, we would use things like gorum for blue.
Yeah.
Gorum is blue. But in Harris, and maybe further south, they would say year. And I would use year for grey. So there's a bit of concepts of colour, even in Gaelic, which aren't necessarily equating to a kind of modern developed palette, where there was variation across different areas. So yeah, lia, gorum. Gorum could also mean green. So if the grass is very, very fertile, it could be gorum, which you would, that's counterintuitive. That sounds like blue and green, but it's the depth of colour. So different words for colours. Yeah. Gloss is grey, and again in place names, lots and lots of glass. Grey being quite a common element of place names. Boya for yellow. Yellow is a nice word. You end up with cultural resonances of yellow, and I think it's to do with spring and the emergence of plants.
Also, the greys and the yellows are most commonly what you'll get from natural dyes.
Okay.
The pinks and the blues are quite difficult to get, very, very difficult, would have been very expensive to get. But if you're dyeing cloth with lichen, birch, and acorns, things like that, these greys and anything between the grey, green, yellow spectrum is quite an easy dye to get.
Okay.
So,
well, there's a saying in Gaelic, it was nach boyagut, isn't that yellow for you? What does that mean? And what it means, boya, the yellow, it's a sort of good luck thing, and I think it's to do with the weather's turned, the spring's come back. La boya, a yellow day, and that just means a sort of a good day. So there's lots in there, and obviously there would have been a whole culture of just knitting and so on. Lots of people would have been old ladies knitting while they were collecting the peats or whatever.
Yeah, it's because it's a really easy thing to do on the move. Is just to have a little. There would have probably been a name for the little pocket kind of bag that you can have that you can keep your knitting in, and you could do socks on the move. And it's so interesting how the past comes into the present, because that has now become really popular with people who commute.
Okay.
Because it's a way to have a tidy little project on the go without having big, sweaters and kind of cardigans and things. They take up quite a lot of space. A little pair of socks, it tucks away to the side, doesn't bother anybody.
Now, for me, I don't know lots of that term. I wouldn't know it in English, far less anything else. But there would definitely will be people who will have all of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, still using all of those kind of words on a normal, natural basis. Just you haven't chosen the right person to ask about knitting.
You mentioned just quickly. You said that the word for jumper or sweater in Gaelic,
that's a good word, isn't it?
Is Gensi.
Gensi.
Right, and that has been translated to mean Ganzi in the knitting world. Anyway. But also in the knitting world, Ganzi is a very particular type of jumper. It's not just a generic jumper. It's a very specific jumper that's meant to be based on the patterns of fishing villages. So that's
Gensi in Gaelic, it's become a generic. It may have been something specific once, but it's become a generic for a jumper. Gensi, Conostra Gensi. But again, it's one of those things. I wonder if it's come from a Norse influence. Right. Because even going back, you actually go back quite a long way into the 1400s and so on. Gaelic had started to retreat up to the north and west, but the Viking influence had been very, very strong in the western seaboard. So the Western Isles, west coast. Lots and lots of Norse has come in terms of place names in the Western Isles, and things like Agansi or Agansted, or I think there's a Scandinavian root. It would surprise me not at all if that was how that word had come into Gaelic.
I think there's definitely something there, because I on Instagram follow lots of knitters. do nothing but looking at knitting all day, and there's some Norwegian knitters, and their word for jumper or sweater is more like Jensa with a J.
Well, Gensi, Gensa. It would be, I think it'd be probably really unlikely that there wasn't some sort of connection, given the strength of the Norse influence in the Western Isles. And again, maybe there are other words. My Gaelic comes from Lewis, from the west side of Lewis, where there's a really strong Norse heritage. Maybe if I was from Islay, or from Jura, or from Barra, or from Skye or Mull, I might have a different set of vocabulary, which maybe has a slightly less of a Norse influence. So again, it'll depend on geography and history.
I think it's fascinating the way that languages do travel and people find a common way to communicate, even hundreds of miles apart. In the villages, you could exchange goods, services, and travel. They found a way to make it work.
Well, I think Gaelic would have been across the whole area. I mean, there would have been a common route, and as even Irish, Gaelic is the same language. But over time, these things diverge, and because people didn't have broadcasting, they didn't have this kind of common source of hearing the language being used. Then even if you have two communities on the far side of a mountain, it's really difficult to travel from one to the other. Then over time, language will evolve in two different communities. If you add in mountains, lochs, rivers, the sea, then it's no wonder that language moves like that. But there are still common stuff in there that you can get along with. It's quite unusual. It's interesting that Gaelic has lost a lot of that. Lost a lot of local dialects, and sometimes it'll stop you in your tracks when you hear an older person speaking a form of Gaelic, and you just hear the richness, the difference from what you know. It's a real shame that we've lost lots of that, but at some point when it's there, it's fabulous to hear certain dialects which are very, very strong, and we've lost lots of that.
So is there anywhere where people can go? People quite often are watching things like Loch Ness Living, planning a journey, thinking of coming over here for their trip to just connect to the area, find out more. What kind of places could they go to do a little bit of research and help plan their trip?
Well, in terms of ourselves, we have a website, gaelicguides.co.uk. But even if it's just a research question, I'm quite happy that somebody asks a question, and we'll get the best answer that we can offer. In terms of a Gaelic heritage, you could try something like learngaelic.net, which is a language-focused thing. So that's quite a good resource in terms of where they would get that. Other things, it depends on their area of interest. So if they were looking for genealogy and family history, there's a very good resource centre in Inverness. The Highland Council runs a very good archive centre, which will help with genealogy and so on. I guess there's hundreds of websites which can look at specific things, but it will just depend on what your particular interest is.
So it's worth knowing if somebody, is planning a trip to the area, if they particularly want to connect with that Gaelic history and culture for their family, if they kind of come to you and say, we came from this area, we'd really just like to know more about it, maybe go for a visit, you'd be
absolutely. And I think that's what I'd prefer to do. Well, on our website, we do have a set number of tours. We can go and do this, we can go and do that. But actually, what I prefer somebody to do is to say, I think I came from that area there, or my family belongs to that community. Perfect, because that gives you something tailored to that individual or that group, where you can go, which might be quite a decent way off the beaten track, but at least in advance, I get a chance to look at it, research it, local culture and stuff, place names and so on, and somebody gets a chance to go along there and then get that hopefully what I would say value added, not just getting to visit the place with somebody who's who knows where they're going and so on, but able to sort of prepare in advance and make it a richer experience.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic. A way to make that once in a lifetime trip to this area just really, really special and unique for
I'd like to think so. And I think sometimes it's just taking a tour with somebody who belongs to the area, brought up in the area, worked in the area for 20, 30, 40 years. There's a perspective in there as well. How does the local area work? Quite apart from language stuff, what makes the area tick? Why are the roads so bad? Why is the why is the phone signal not so good?
Yeah.
These kind of things. There's lots of information behind that,
Yeah.
which when you come along to visit, it wouldn't be at the top of your list. But it does, all these wee bits and
Yeah.
pieces add colour.
Yeah, because as I talked about in another piece that I did previously with Callum, who's an ecologist, the Highlands looks the way it looks because of very specific things that have happened with people in the last few hundred years, and very specific things that are happening now in terms of wind farms and grouse shooting. So there's very specific things in our landscape and in our Highland, and if you drive through it, it looks very pretty. But if you walk through it and take the time and kind of learn and talk to the people around, you will get that added.
It looks pristine and natural, but actually it's not. There's lots and lots of influences, as you say, have shaped it. Even going back to geological forces, why are the peaks the way they are? Why are the valleys shaped the way they are? There's a sort of glacial heritage in there as well. Lots and lots of really good stuff. And I think it's a fabulous place to come and visit. And if you can just take little bits out of each of these. There's a saying in Gaelic which is "Salt pascach shade," and it's a little bit from each pot, and you put all that together and you get a better mix.
That's fantastic. What a wonderful way to finish. We'll take a little bit from each pot. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Should have been.